Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 8, its deep chimes resonating through the two-story suburban home like a brass bell calling faithful to prayer. John Matthews lifted his head from the laptop screen, his eyes burning from staring at financial reports since returning from the office. The house around him sat unnaturally quiet, devoid of the usual sounds of his wife's evening routine. No TV murmuring in the background, no phone conversations with friends, no soft footsteps moving between rooms that he rubbed his tired eyes, the gold wedding band on his finger catching the warm light from his desk lamp. 20 years of marriage had carved deep grooves into his life, comfortable routines that shaped his days. The dining room table had become his second office, covered in neat stacks of papers and reports. 3 empty coffee mugs forming a semicircle around his laptop like a caffeinated constellation. The kitchen beyond the dining room gleamed with unused perfection. Rebecca had always insisted on top-of-the-line appliances, though lately, they seemed more for show than function. The marble countertops reflected the recessed lighting, creating pools of brightness that emphasized the emptiness of the space. When was the last time they'd sat down to dinner together? John couldn't remember. "Rebecca," he called out, his voice carrying through the house's open floor plan. The silence that answered felt deliberate, heavy with unspoken tension. Standing from his chair, John's joints cracked in protest. At 45, he wasn't old, but long hours at the investment firm had taken their toll. He loosened his charcoal tie, the one Rebecca had given him last Christmas, and surveyed the living room as he passed through. Everything in its proper place, almost too perfect, like a model home waiting for real people to move in and make it lived in. Rebecca's phone lay on the coffee table, its presence unusual and somehow ominous. She carried the thing everywhere, constantly checking messages, scrolling through social media, maintaining her carefully curated online presence. Seeing it abandoned made the hair on the back of his neck rise. The hardwood stairs creaked under his feet as he climbed to the second floor, each step echoing in the silence. Family photos lined the stairwell wall. Their wedding day, vacation snapshots, holiday gatherings. Looking at them now, John noticed something he'd missed before. The gradual change in Rebecca's smile, from genuine joy to practiced perfection. Her eyes growing colder with each passing year, to a strip of warm light spilled from beneath their bedroom door, accompanied by the soft rustle of movement inside. The scent of Rebecca's favorite perfume, Japanese cherry blossom, drifted through the air, stronger than usual. She only wore that much when she wanted something. "Rebecca," he called again. Pushing open the door, the sight that greeted him stopped him cold. Rebecca stood before their full-length mirror, her body wrapped in nothing but a black silk robe that barely reached mid-thigh. Her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders in carefully styled waves, catching the light like spun gold. She'd done something different with her makeup. Smoky eyes, blood-red lips, the kind of effort she usually reserved for charity galas and social events. But it was her eyes that held him frozen. When she turned to face him, John saw something in them he'd never witnessed before, a cold, calculated determination that made his stomach clench. This wasn't his wife of 20 years. This was someone else entirely. "You're finally paying attention," she said, her voice carrying an edge sharp enough to draw blood. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach those unfamiliar eyes. John stepped fully into the room, his mind racing to process the scene before him. The bedroom, usually a shared sanctuary, felt like alien territory. Rebecca had transformed their personal space into a stage, and he had walked into a performance already in progress. The room itself betrayed careful preparation. Scented candles flickered on the dresser, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Their bed, had been made with fresh linens, the dark burgundy sheets turned down invitingly. The whole setup felt choreographed, deliberate in its sensuality. "What's going on?" he asked, keeping his voice level despite the alarm bells screaming in his head. 2 decades of marriage had taught him to read his wife's moods. But this was something entirely new, something dangerous. Rebecca's laugh held no warmth as she turned back to the mirror, adjusting her robe to reveal another inch of tan thigh. 20 years is a long time, John," she said, running her hands down her sides in a gesture that was both seductive and threatening. 20 years of being the perfect, faithful wife. Do you have any idea how many men have tried to get my attention over the years? John's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, watching her performance with increasingly wary eyes. Each movement she made seemed calculated to provoke a response, to crack his carefully maintained composure. "Oh, they've been persistent," she continued, her voice taking on a dreamy quality that made his skin crawl. "Executives at your firm's parties, tennis instructors at the club, even that young artist who did our portrait last summer. All of them promising to give me what you couldn't. Attention, passion, desire." She moved closer to him, her perfume now overwhelming in its intensity. "I turned them all down," she practically purred. "Played my role as the devoted wife while you buried yourself in work. Coming home late, barely touching me, barely seeing me." Her voice hardened. "But I'm done pretending. Done suppressing what I want? What exactly are you saying?" John's voice emerged low and dangerous, a tone he rarely used outside of high-stakes negotiations that Rebecca's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I'm saying that tonight I'm going to be with someone who actually wants me. Someone who's been pursuing me for months, showing me the attention you've forgotten how to give. Someone who makes me feel alive again." The words hit John like physical blows, but years of business dealings had taught him to keep his expression neutral. 20 years of shared history, of building a life together, and she had chosen to destroy it all with theatrical cruelty. "He's coming here tonight," Rebecca announced, turning back to the mirror to adjust her hair. "I thought you should know, since this is your house too. Though lately it feels more like a museum of what our marriage used to be." The grandfather clock downstairs struck the quarter hour, its chime echoing through the tense silence. John stood perfectly still, his mind racing through 20 years of memories. Their first date at that Italian restaurant downtown, the nervous proposal in Central Park, their wedding day when she'd looked at him like he was her whole world. The woman before him now bore no resemblance to that bright-eyed bride who'd promised to love him forever without a word. He turned and walked out of the bedroom, his footsteps measured and controlled. The house seemed different now, transformed from a home into a battlefield. Each family photo he passed on the way to his study felt like an accusation, a reminder of what they'd lost or perhaps what they'd never really had. The study door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the decision he knew he had to make. John's study had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could think clearly and make decisions without emotional interference. The room smelled of leather and old books, a masculine contrast to the carefully decorated spaces Rebecca controlled. Here, surrounded by dark wood and memories of his father's advice about being a man of principle, John faced the reality of his situation. The painting that concealed his safe had been a wedding gift from Rebecca's parents, an abstract piece in blues and grays that Rebecca had always said reminded her of storm clouds gathering over the ocean. How appropriate that symbolism felt now. As he lifted it from its hooks with steady hands, the safe itself was a top-of-the-line model, its combination lock responding to his touch with familiar precision. He'd memorized these numbers years ago. Rebecca's birthday, the day they met, the year they married. Now each number felt like a mockery as he spun the dial. Inside, past the important documents and emergency cash, sat his Magnum revolver. He'd bought it 5 years ago after a series of break-ins in their neighborhood, much to Rebecca's vocal disapproval. "We live in a safe area," she'd argued. "We don't need guns in the house." Now he wondered if her objection had more to do with her own plans than any concern about safety. The weight of the gun felt right in his hand as he checked the chamber, fully loaded, just as he always kept it. He grabbed a box of ammunition from the back of the safe, slipping it into his pocket. The metal was cool against his palm, a solid reminder of consequences and choices. Walking back to the bedroom, John felt a strange sense of clarity. The house's silence took on a different quality now, like the calm before a storm. Each step up the stairs felt deliberate, purposeful. This wasn't the angry reaction of a betrayed husband. This was the calculated response of a man who'd been pushed too far. Rebecca was still admiring herself in the mirror when he entered, adjusting her jewelry diamond earrings he'd given her for their 15th anniversary. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, and her carefully constructed facade cracked at the sight of the gun in his hand. Fear flickered across her face, quick as lightning, but unmistakable. "What are you doing?" The confidence in her voice wavered, revealing the uncertainty beneath her bold exterior. John's face remained impassive as he spoke, his voice carrying the same deadly calm he used when closing million-dollar deals. "I want you to understand something, Rebecca. When this man arrives, this person who thinks he has the right to step into my home and take my wife, I won't hesitate to kill him." Rebecca's hand flew to her throat, fingers clutching at nothing. "You wouldn't dare. This isn't you, John. You're not." "Not what?" He cut her off. "Not the kind of man who'd defend his marriage. 20 years ago, I made a vow to protect what's mine. I've never broken a promise in my life, and I don't intend to start now. What's yours?" Rebecca's voice rose, tinged with hysteria. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of anger spreading across her cheeks. "I'm not your property, John. I'm a woman who's been dying inside, while you treat me like part of the furniture. Do you know how many nights I've laid awake beside you, wondering if you even remembered I was there?" John's expression didn't change as he met her gaze. "You're right. You're not my property. You're my wife, and you made vows too. If you choose to break them, that's your decision. But if this man steps foot in my house, he's made his choice as well." Rebecca's hands trembled as she pulled her robe tighter around herself, the seductive confidence of earlier crumbling in the face of his resolution. "You've become so cold," she whispered, her voice catching. "So distant. I thought you wouldn't care. I thought you'd just accept it like you accept everything else with that damn stoic silence of yours." "You thought wrong." The words came out flat, final. "You've made assumptions about me, Rebecca. About what I'd tolerate. About who I am. Tonight, you're going to learn how wrong those assumptions were." He turned and walked out of the bedroom, the gun still in his hand. "I'll be waiting downstairs. Your lover has a choice to make tonight." The grandfather clock tracked his descent with steady ticks, each step measured and deliberate. In the living room, he placed the gun on the coffee table, a promise made of blue steel and deadly intent. The house felt different now, charged with potential energy like a coiled spring waiting to release. John moved to the bar cart in the corner, another wedding gift that had seen more use in recent years than he cared to admit. The crystal decanter caught the light as he poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, the expensive kind Rebecca had given him last Christmas. Every gift between them suddenly felt tainted, weighted with hidden meanings and unspoken accusations. Settling into his leather armchair, John held the whiskey glass against his palm, letting its coolness ground him in the moment. The living room, with its carefully chosen furniture and artfully arranged photos, felt like a stage set for the drama about to unfold. 20 years of memories surrounded him. The couch where they'd planned their future, the window seat where they'd watched countless summer storms, the mantel displaying photos of happier times upstairs. Rebecca's footsteps betrayed her nervousness. The confident seductress act had cracked, revealing the uncertainty beneath. Let her worry, he thought, taking a measured sip of whiskey. Let her understand the weight of what she was about to destroy. The sound of heels on hardwood announced her descent. She appeared in the living room doorway, still wearing the silk robe, but now fully adorned with jewelry. The diamond earrings, a tennis bracelet from their 10th anniversary, the sapphire pendant he'd given her after closing his biggest deal. Each piece felt like a deliberate choice, selected to remind him of what he was about to lose. "This is insane," she said, her voice shakier than before. The candlelight from upstairs had been replaced by harsh reality, and she looked less certain in the living room's unforgiving brightness. "You need to put that gun away before someone gets hurt." John took another slow sip of whiskey, letting the silence stretch between them. "The only person who might get hurt tonight is the man who thinks he can walk into my house and take what isn't his. Stop talking about me like I'm your possession." Rebecca's voice rose, echoing off the high ceilings. "I'm a person with needs and desires. Needs you've ignored for years while you buried yourself in work. When was the last time you really looked at me, and saw more than just an obligation?" "If you were unhappy," John replied, his voice steady, "you could have talked to me. We could have gone to counseling, worked on our issues. Instead, you chose to invite another man into our bed." Rebecca's face flushed with anger and something else, perhaps the first glimmer of shame. Talk to you? When? Between your endless meetings and late nights at the office? You barely look at me anymore, John. When was the last time you actually saw me as a woman instead of just your wife? Being my wife used to mean something to you, John said, taking another sip. The whiskey burned less now, numbed by the cold rage in his chest. It used to be enough. Well, it's not anymore. Rebecca's voice cracked, raw emotion breaking through her carefully constructed facade. I need more than your stoic silence and occasional gifts. I need passion, desire, someone who makes me feel alive. Someone who the buzz of John's phone cut through her words like a knife. Rebecca flinched at the sound, her hand instinctively reaching for her own phone before remembering she'd left it upstairs. The mask of confidence slipped further, revealing naked fear beneath. Your lover? John asked, though he already knew the answer. The silence that followed was answer enough. Tell him to come in when he arrives. I want to have a conversation with him. Rebecca's manufactured bravado crumbled further. This isn't like you, John. You're not violent. You're not the kind of man who... You don't know what kind of man I am anymore. John cut her off, his voice carrying an edge that made her step back. You made that clear upstairs. You think 20 years of marriage have made me weak, incapable of action. Tonight, you're going to learn how wrong you are. The sound of a car pulling into their driveway cut through the tension. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as headlights swept across the living room windows, illuminating John's face for a moment. His expression remained unchanged, but his eyes had taken on a dangerous glint that made her step back involuntarily. Last chance, he said quietly, setting down his whiskey glass. Send him away, and we can talk about this like the married couple we're supposed to be. Rebecca's hand trembled as she pulled out her phone, its screen casting a blue glow across her face. For a long moment, she stared at it, her thumb hovering over the keys. John watched her, seeing the battle play out across her features. 20 years of marriage weighing against whatever promises of passion and excitement this other man had offered. Then her jaw set, and that same cold determination he'd seen upstairs returned to her eyes. No, she said, squaring her shoulders. I'm done living half a life. If you want to stop this, you'll have to do it yourself. John nodded once, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. He set his whiskey glass down with deliberate care and picked up the gun, its weight familiar in his hand. The metal caught the light, a deadly promise made manifest. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime absurdly out of place in the tension-filled room. Well then, he said, rising from his chair with fluid grace that belied his earlier weariness. Let's go meet the man who thinks he can destroy 20 years of marriage in one night. Rebecca watched him walk to the door, her face a mixture of fear and defiance. The grandfather clock struck 9, its chimes echoing through the house like a funeral toll. In the silence that followed, John reached for the door handle, his grip on the gun steady and sure, the moment stretched like a wire pulled too tight, waiting to snap. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the door, a man's silhouette was visible, tall, younger than John, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. John's finger rested alongside the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself, a deliberate choice that spoke of control rather than impulse. Rebecca stood frozen in the living room doorway, her earlier bravado replaced by the dawning realization of what she had set in motion. The silk robe that had seemed so seductive upstairs now looked painfully inadequate, like costume jewelry trying to pass for diamonds. With one fluid motion, John opened the door to face the man who had dared to covet his wife, 20 years of marriage hanging in the balance. The night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain and the promise of violence. The man on the doorstep stood a few inches taller than John, maybe mid-30s, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that screamed corporate success. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his clean-shaven face handsome in a generic way. The kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted with a smile and a smooth word. That smile faltered when he saw the gun in John's hand. "Mr. Matthews," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm Brian Porter." "Come in, Brian." John's voice carried the same calm authority he used in board meetings. He stepped aside, keeping the gun visible but not directly threatening. We have some things to discuss. Brian's eyes darted past John to Rebecca, who stood frozen in the living room doorway. Her face had lost all color, the seductive confidence from earlier replaced by naked fear. Maybe this isn't. Brian started to back away, but John's voice cut him off. Either come inside so we can talk like men, or run away now and never contact my wife again. Your choice, but make it quickly. A muscle twitched in Brian's jaw. He glanced at Rebecca again, then squared his shoulders and stepped inside. John closed the door behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded more threatening than a slam. Living room, John directed, gesturing with his free hand. Have a seat. Brian moved into the room, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the hardwood floors. He chose the armchair farthest from John's position, perching on the edge like a man ready to bolt. Rebecca, John said without taking his eyes off Brian. Why don't you sit down as well? Since you arranged this little meeting, you should be part of the conversation. Rebecca moved to the couch, pulling her silk robe tighter around herself. The seductive outfit that had seemed so powerful upstairs now made her look vulnerable, out of place in the harsh reality of the situation. Now then, John said, remaining standing. He placed the gun on the coffee table, within easy reach, but no longer in his hand. Let's talk about why you think you have the right to come into my home and try to take my wife. Look, Mr. Matthews, Brian's voice carried a slight tremor despite his attempt at confidence. This isn't what you think. Rebecca and you what? John's voice cut through the air like a blade. Go ahead, Brian. Tell me about your relationship with my wife of 20 years. Tell me how you justified pursuing a married woman. I'm curious to hear your rationalization. Brian shifted uncomfortably in his chair. She told me things weren't good between you, that you were distant, that you didn't appreciate her anymore, and that made it okay. John's laugh held no humor. Tell me, Brian, do you make a habit of sleeping with other men's wives, or is my wife special? John! Rebecca's voice cracked with tension. Don't talk about me like I'm not here. Oh, I haven't forgotten you're here, John replied, his eyes still fixed on Brian. I just want to understand the man you chose to destroy our marriage for. So, Brian, answer the question. How many other marriages have you broken up? Brian's face flushed red. It's not like that. I care about Rebecca. We connected on a level that... Connected? John's voice remained deadly calm. You mean at the gym where you work as a trainer? Or was it during those private sessions you started scheduling with my wife? Both Brian and Rebecca stared at him in shock. Did you think I didn't know? John continued, settling into his own chair with deliberate casualness. That I wouldn't notice the extra charges on our credit card? The late-night text messages? The sudden interest in fitness? You knew. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. All this time you knew? I knew something was happening, John replied. I didn't know you'd take it this far. I didn't think you'd actually invite your lover into our home, into our bed. He turned his attention back to Brian. So tell me, what was the plan? Sleep with my wife in my house. Then what? Take her away to some fairy tale life where everything would be perfect. Brian straightened in his chair, finding a spark of defiance. At least I make her feel wanted. When was the last time you showed her any real attention? Any passion? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. John's expression didn't change, but his eyes took on a dangerous glint. You think because you've known my wife for a few months, you understand our marriage? John's voice was soft, almost gentle. 20 years of history, of building a life together, and you think you can judge it based on whatever stories Rebecca told you to justify her actions? He leaned forward, and Brian instinctively pressed back into his chair. Let me tell you what I understand about you, Brian. You're a predator who targets vulnerable women, makes them feel special with empty compliments and promises, then moves on when things get complicated. How close am I? That's not true, Rebecca interjected, but her voice lacked conviction. Brian loves me. He understands me in a way you never did. Love. John's laugh was sharp and cold. Is that what you call it? Tell me, Brian, do you love Rebecca enough to face the consequences of your actions? Or were you hoping to have your fun and slip away when things got difficult? Brian's silence spoke volumes. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's cool temperature, his earlier confidence evaporating under John's steady gaze. Nothing to say? John pressed, his voice carrying the weight of controlled rage. No declarations of love? No promises about giving Rebecca a better life? I didn't come here to be interrogated, Brian finally managed, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Rebecca made her choice. She doesn't want this marriage anymore. John's smile never reached his eyes. And you think you know what Rebecca wants based on a few months of stolen moments? Tell me, what are your plans for her? Have you thought beyond tonight's adventure? We've discussed our future, Brian said, attempting to sound confident. I have a condo downtown. A rental, John cut in that new development on 5th Street. Nice place, but hardly the lifestyle Rebecca's accustomed to. What else? Going to support her on a personal trainer's salary. Rebecca stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. Stop it. You're trying to make him sound inadequate because he doesn't have your money? At least Brian makes me feel alive. When was the last time you did that? John turned to face his wife, his expression unchanged. Feeling alive is a poor substitute for building a life, Rebecca. But please, tell me more about this wonderful future you've planned. Will Brian be taking you to the charity galas you love so much? Buying you designer dresses? Supporting your tennis club membership? It's not about money. Rebecca's voice cracked. It's about feeling wanted, desired, appreciated. And you, John turned back to Brian. You're ready to provide all that? Ready to wake up every morning and prove yourself worthy of destroying a 20-year marriage? Brian shifted uncomfortably. Look, Mr. Matthews, I understand you're angry. Angry? John's laugh was cold enough to freeze the air between them. No, Brian, I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. Disappointed that my wife chose such an amateur for her grand gesture of rebellion. He stood, moving to the bar cart with deliberate steps. The clink of crystal against crystal filled the tense silence as he poured another whiskey. Tell me, what exactly attracted you to my wife? Was it her beauty? Her vulnerability? Or was it the challenge of seducing a wealthy man's wife? You don't know anything about our relationship, Brian protested, but his voice wavered. I know more than you think. John turned, glass in hand. I know about the late-night texts, the training sessions that ran long, the coffee meetings that turned into lunch dates. I know how you worked to gain her trust, to make her feel special and understood. Rebecca's face paled. You were spying on me? I was protecting my interests, John corrected. Something every successful man learns to do. The question is, Brian, what are you protecting? What do you have to offer besides empty promises and stolen moments? Brian stood suddenly, his face red with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. I don't have to listen to this. Rebecca, let's go. Sit down. John's voice carried such authority that Brian found himself obeying before he could think. We're not finished here. The grandfather clock ticked away the heavy seconds. Outside, a distant roll of thunder promised an approaching storm. Rebecca, John said without looking at her, why don't you tell Brian about the life you're leaving behind? About the house in the Hamptons you love so much? The weekly spa appointments? The charity board positions that mean so much to you? Stop it, Rebecca whispered, but John continued. Tell him about your mother's medical bills that I pay without question. The college fund for your niece. The yearly trips to Europe you can't live without. I said stop it. Rebecca's voice rose to a shout. You're making it sound like I'm some kind of gold digger. No, John replied calmly. I'm making it sound like you're someone who's taken a very comfortable life for granted. Someone who's about to trade certainty for promises made in the heat of passion. He moved to stand between them, his presence commanding the room. So here's what's going to happen. Brian, you're going to walk out that door and never contact my wife again. You're going to find a new gym, a new hunting ground for your particular talents. And you're going to remember this night every time you think about pursuing another man's wife. And if I don't? Brian challenged, but his voice lacked conviction that John's smile was terrifying in its calmness. Then we'll find out if you're willing to die for a few months of stolen kisses and secret text messages. The threat hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Brian's face had lost all color. His earlier bravado completely evaporated under John's unwavering stare. You wouldn't, Brian managed, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty. You're bluffing. You wouldn't throw away your life over this. John picked up the magnum from the coffee table, checking the chamber with practiced ease. 20 years of marriage. 2 decades of building a life together. And you think I wouldn't defend that? He closed the chamber with a decisive click. You clearly don't understand what marriage means to a man of principle. John, please. Rebecca's voice trembled. Put the gun away. This has gone too far. Too far. John's laugh held no warmth. You invited your lover into our home, into the bed we've shared for 20 years, and you think this has gone too far? No, Rebecca. This is exactly where it needs to go. Thunder rolled outside, closer now. Rain began to patter against the windows, nature providing a soundtrack to the drama unfolding in the living room. I made a mistake, Brian said, raising his hands in surrender. I'll leave. You'll never hear from me again. A mistake? John's voice was deadly quiet. Pursuing a married woman wasn't a mistake, Brian. It was a choice. Every text message, every private training session, every lie you told, those were choices. Now you get to face the consequences of those choices. Rebecca moved between them, her robe catching the lamplight. John, listen to me. If you do this, you'll destroy everything. Your career, your reputation, everything you've worked for. Everything we've worked for, John corrected her. Or have you forgotten that too? Forgotten how we built this life together? How we struggled through those early years when I was just starting at the firm? I haven't forgotten, Rebecca whispered, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. But we've grown apart. You became obsessed with work, with success, with providing the life you wanted, John cut in. The life you're so eager to throw away for this. He gestured at Brian with contempt, this imitation of passion. Brian stood slowly, his hands still raised. Mr. Matthews, you're right. I was out of line. I should never have. The sharp crack of the gunshot cut through his words. The bullet struck the wall inches from Brian's head, sending plaster dust raining down on his expensive suit. Rebecca screamed, stumbling backward into an end table. The lamp crashed to the floor, shattering in a spray of ceramic and light. Sit down. John's voice hadn't changed, still carrying that same deadly calm. Brian collapsed back into the chair, shaking visibly now. The next shot won't miss, John continued, the gun steady in his hand. Now let's try this again. Tell me why you thought you had the right to destroy my marriage. I didn't. Brian stammered, sweat running down his face. Rebecca said things weren't good between you. Said she was lonely, neglected. You thought you'd play the hero, John finished for him. Sweep in and rescue the neglected wife from her cold, workaholic husband. Did it make you feel powerful, Brian? Make you feel like a real man, seducing another man's wife? John, stop! Rebecca pleaded. This isn't you. You're not violent. Not cruel. You don't know me anymore, Rebecca. That's what you said upstairs, remember? You thought 20 years had made me weak, incapable of action. Well, now you're seeing action. Now you're seeing exactly what I'm capable of. Another crack of thunder shook the windows. The storm had arrived in full force now, rain lashing against the glass in angry sheets. Please, Brian's voice had lost all pretense of dignity. I'll leave. I'll quit my job, move away. Whatever you want. What I want. John's finger caressed the trigger. What I want is my wife to honor her vows. What I want is men like you to understand that actions have consequences. What I want is, I'll end it. Rebecca burst out. I'll break it off with him. Just please put the gun down. John turned to look at his wife. Really look at her, for the first time since this confrontation began. Her makeup was streaked with tears, her carefully styled hair falling in disarray around her face. The seductive confidence from earlier had been stripped away, leaving behind something raw and frightened. It's already ended, John said quietly. The moment you invited him here, you ended everything. Our marriage, our trust, our future, all of it gone, because you couldn't be content with the life we built. He turned back to Brian, who had shrunk further into the chair. Stand up. Brian hesitated, then slowly rose to his feet. Walk to the door, John commanded. If you ever come near my wife again, if you ever so much as think about her, the next shot won't be a warning. Do you understand? Brian nodded frantically, backing toward the door on shaking legs. His hand fumbled with the knob for a moment before he managed to wrench it open. The storm's fury rushed in, wind and rain spattering the entryway floor. "Run," John said simply. Brian ran, the door slammed behind him, leaving John and Rebecca alone with the sound of the rain and their broken marriage. The storm raged outside, but inside the house, a different kind of tempest was brewing. Rebecca stood in the middle of the living room, her silk robe clinging to her body like a second skin, watching as John methodically checked the wall where his warning shot had struck. "You could have killed him," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. John's fingers traced the bullet hole in the plaster, his touch almost gentle. "If I wanted to kill him, he'd be dead." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "But death would have been too easy. I wanted him to live with the memory of tonight. I wanted him to understand the consequences of his actions." "And what about my actions?" Rebecca's voice cracked. "Are you going to punish me too?" "Punish you?" John's laugh was hollow. "You've punished yourself more thoroughly than I ever could. Look around you, Rebecca. Look at what you've thrown away." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room in harsh white light. The broken lamp lay scattered across the floor, its shards catching the light like fallen stars. On the walls, their wedding photos seemed to mock them, frozen moments of happiness that now felt like relics from another life. "I never meant for it to go this far," Rebecca whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I just wanted to feel something again, to know that I was still desirable, still alive." "And did it work?" John's voice carried no emotion. "Did destroying our marriage make you feel alive? Did watching another man run away in terror give you the excitement you were looking for?" Rebecca sank onto the couch, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. "You don't understand. All these years, watching you pour yourself into work, coming home late, barely touching me, I felt like I was fading away, becoming invisible. So you decided to make yourself visible by inviting your lover into our bed." John moved to the bar cart, but this time he didn't pour a drink. Instead, he stood there, running his finger along the crystal decanter's edge. "Tell me something, Rebecca. When did you stop loving me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 20 years of shared history. "I didn't," she said finally, tears streaming down her face. "That's what makes this so horrible. I never stopped loving you. I stopped feeling loved by you. And that justifies betrayal?" John turned to face her, his eyes hard. "That makes it okay to throw away 2 decades of marriage?" "No." Rebecca stood abruptly, her voice rising. "Nothing justifies what I did. Is that what you want to hear? That I'm a horrible person? That I destroyed everything because I was weak and selfish? What I want," John said quietly, "is to understand how I married the woman who stood before God and our families and promised to love me forever, could become someone capable of this level of betrayal." Rebecca moved toward him, her hand outstretched. "John, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work on our problems." "Stop." The single word carried enough force to freeze her in place. "There is no fixing this. You didn't make a mistake, Rebecca. You made a series of calculated decisions. You chose to pursue an affair. You chose to bring him here. You chose to destroy everything we built together. I was wrong." The words burst from her like a dam breaking. "I see that now. When you pulled out that gun, when I saw what this was doing to you, I realized how stupid and selfish I've been. Please, John, 20 years has to mean something." "It meant everything," John replied, his voice soft but implacable. "That's why there's no coming back from this. You didn't just betray our marriage vows. You deliberately orchestrated this entire evening to cause maximum pain. You wanted to hurt me, to prove you had power over me." "No," Rebecca protested, but her voice lacked conviction. You wanted to punish me for working too hard, for not giving you enough attention." John's words cut through her excuses like a knife. "So you decided to bring your lover into our home, into our bed, to show me what I'd been missing. Tell me, Rebecca, how did that work out for you?" Rebecca collapsed back onto the couch, her makeup completely ruined by tears, The sophisticated image she'd crafted earlier in the evening now a mockery of itself. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I just wanted you to fight for me. Fight for you." John's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened around the crystal decanter. "You wanted me to prove my love by competing with a gym trainer who specialized in seducing lonely housewives? That's not fair," Rebecca protested. "Brian and I, don't say his name in this house again." The words came out like ice. "Don't pretend what you had with him was anything more than a pathetic attempt to feel young and desired again." Lightning flashed outside, followed immediately by a thunderclap that rattled the windows. The storm had reached its peak, matching the tension in the room. "You want to know what really happened tonight, Rebecca?" John set the decanter down with deliberate care. "You thought you knew me. Thought 20 years of marriage had made me predictable, safe. You expected me to either accept your betrayal quietly or throw a jealous tantrum that would justify your actions." He moved to the fireplace, picking up a framed photo of their wedding day. "Instead, you discovered that you never really knew me at all. That the man you dismissed as cold and passive was actually someone who would fight to defend what's his not with childish displays of emotion, but with calculated, decisive action. I know you now," Rebecca said, her voice trembling. "I see the real you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, John. Please, can't we try to fix this?" John placed the wedding photo face down on the mantel. "Tell me something, Rebecca. If I hadn't been home tonight, if I hadn't confronted you and your lover, would you be apologizing now? Or would you be in our bed with him, laughing about how easily you deceived your boring, workaholic husband?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "John," Rebecca tried again, rising from the couch on unsteady legs. "Everything I did tonight was wrong. I see that now. But 20 years of marriage, surely that's worth fighting for. Our marriage died the moment you invited another man into our bed." John's voice carried the finality of a judge passing sentence. "What you're seeing now isn't a fight to save our marriage. It's the consequences of your choices playing out exactly as they should." Rebecca moved toward him, reaching for his arm. "We can start over. Go to counseling. Rebuild trust." John stepped away from her touch as if it burned. "There is no starting over, Rebecca. You didn't just make a mistake. You didn't have a moment of weakness. You orchestrated an elaborate betrayal, planned it down to the last detail, chose the maximum amount of cruelty. I wasn't thinking clearly." Rebecca's voice rose in desperation. "I was caught up in the excitement, the attention." "The attention," John cut her off. "Always about attention with you. Tell me, did you get enough attention tonight? Did watching your lover run away in terror while I held a gun to his head give you the excitement you were craving?" Rebecca flinched as if he'd struck her. "You're being cruel." "No," John replied calmly. "I'm being honest. Something you might want to try sometime." He walked to the window, watching the storm rage outside. The rain traced patterns on the glass, distorting the view of their perfectly manicured lawn and the expensive cars in the driveway, all the trappings of the life they'd built together. "Do you remember what my father told us at our wedding?" he asked, his voice distant. "He said marriage isn't about romance or passion. It's about choice. Every day, you choose your spouse again. Every day, you choose to honor your vows, to put your marriage first." "I remember," Rebecca whispered. "Tonight, you made your choice." John turned back to face her. "You chose to break those vows in the most devastating way possible. You chose to invite another man into our home, into our bed, into the life we built together. And now you're choosing to throw everything away." Rebecca's voice cracked. 20 years of marriage just gone? "No, Rebecca." John's voice was gentle, but implacable. "You threw it away. I'm just acknowledging what you've already destroyed." Thunder rolled outside as John moved toward the stairs, his footsteps heavy with purpose. Rebecca watched him, panic rising in her throat. "Where are you going?" Her voice trembled with fear. "To pack a bag," John replied without turning. "I'll be staying at the peninsula tonight. I suggest you use this time to think about your next steps." "You're leaving?" Rebecca hurried after him, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. "Just like that? 20 years of marriage, and you're walking away." John stopped at the foot of the stairs, turning to face her with dangerous calm. Did you expect me to stay? To sleep in that bed where you planned to betray me? To pretend this night never happened? I expected you to fight for us. The words burst from her like an accusation. Fight for us? John's laugh was cold enough to freeze the air between them. You invited another man into our home, into our bed, and you expected me to beg you to stay? To compete for your affection like some lovesick teenager? At least I would have shown you cared. Rebecca's voice cracked with desperation. Instead, you're walking away, cool and controlled like always. Like our marriage means nothing. Our marriage meant everything to me. John's voice carried the weight of 2 decades of shared history. That's why there's no coming back from this. You didn't just have an affair, Rebecca. You deliberately orchestrated this entire evening to cause maximum pain, to prove you had power over me. That's not true. But even as she protested, Rebecca heard the hollow ring of denial in her voice. Isn't it? John's eyes bore into hers. You chose to tell me about your lover instead of sneaking around. You chose to wear that robe, to make a show of your betrayal. You wanted to hurt me, to shake my control, to make me feel as powerless as you claimed to feel. Rebecca sank onto the bottom step, her robe falling open to reveal the lingerie she'd chosen for another man. I just wanted to feel something, she whispered, to break through your wall of perfect control, to make you see me again. I never stopped seeing you, John replied, his voice softening for a moment. I saw every change, every sign of your growing dissatisfaction. I saw the way you started dressing differently for your gym sessions, the way you checked your phone more often, the secret smiles when you thought I wasn't looking. Then why didn't you say anything? Rebecca looked up at him, mascara streaking her cheeks. Why didn't you confront me? Because I trusted you. The simple words fell between them like stones. I trusted that 20 years of marriage meant something to you, that our vows were more than just words. John turned and climbed the stairs, leaving Rebecca huddled on the bottom step. She listened to his movements. Above, drawers opening, hangers sliding on rods, the quiet efficiency of a man who'd made his decision. When he returned 10 minutes later, a leather overnight bag in his hand, Rebecca hadn't moved. She watched as he collected his laptop from the dining room table, methodically unplugging cords and storing them in their proper places. What happens now? She asked, her voice small in the storm-filled silence. Now. John paused in his methodical packing. Now you get to live with your choices. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow with divorce papers. I suggest you find representation quickly. Divorce? The words seemed to echo through the house. Just like that? No counseling, no second chances? Second chances are for mistakes, Rebecca. What you did tonight wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A series of choices, each one designed to destroy what we built together. He moved to the gun, still lying on the coffee table, checking the chamber before returning it to its case with practiced care. The click of the case, closing, sounded like a door being locked forever. The house is yours until the divorce is settled, he continued, his voice businesslike now. I'll have my assistant collect the rest of my things tomorrow. I suggest you use this time to think carefully about what you want from the settlement. 20 years of marriage deserves at least the pretense of dignity in its ending. Rebecca stood, swaying slightly. So that's it? 20 years erased in one night. No, John replied, picking up his bag. 20 years ended by your choices. By your decision to throw away everything we built together for a few moments of excitement with a man who ran at the first sign of consequences. He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. The storm had begun to ease outside, the thunder more distant now. I want you to understand something, Rebecca. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't a punishment you can wait out. This is the end of our marriage, clean and final. I still love you, Rebecca whispered to his back. John didn't turn around. No, Rebecca. You love the idea of me, the successful husband you could control and manipulate. Tonight proved you never really knew me at all. He opened the door, letting in the smell of rain and ozone. Goodbye, Rebecca. I hope whatever you were looking for tonight was worth the price you'll pay for it. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. Rebecca stood in the silence of their ruined marriage, listening to his car start in the driveway. As the sound of his engine faded into the storm, she sank to the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of 20 years of love and trust. The grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the empty house. In the morning, she would have to face the consequences of her choices. But for now, she sat alone in the darkness, watching the rain wash away the last traces of the life she'd so carelessly destroyed.